Hello, so my name is Everest Jilke, and my presentation is on John Vandemoer, the former Stanford coach. John John Vandemoer was the Stanford coach for their sailing team for 11 years, all the way up until 2018 when he was fired. Um, Under his time working with the team, they won 29 out of the 30 conference championships. There's 3 each year. Um, and he was considered one of the best coaches nationally for his expertise with his teams. Prior to Stanford, he coached at the Naval Academy, first as assistant coach for 1 year and then as the head coach for 2 years. And during this time, too, he brought his team up to their first national championship in 12 years, where they placed fourth. Um, he also holds a U.S. sailing coach level of 3, which is the highest that is given by the organization. So overall, he was a very, very excellent coach, which is something you'll find consistent with him and one of the other head coaches that was charged in the Varsity Blues scandals, Vavich. Both were very well known in their specific fields and at prestigious universities, which is what gave them the opportunity to commit some of the fraud that they did. Um, at, to benefits in the system. But regardless of the fact, his resume itself and his professional career is very well laid out, and he was a very successful individual in his field. To go to go into some more background about uh, Vandemoer, in his personal life, he graduated from Hobart, sorry, that's a weird name to say, and William Smith College in 2000. He had a degree in geochemistry and was a member of the varsity sailing team. And during that time, as working with that sailing team as a athlete, the team held a consistent top 3 ranking. Um, he is currently married with 2 children, one 1-year-old and a 3-year-old at the time of the case in 2018. Um, so he was family-wise, he has a family and children. He graduated from a pretty private university um, that had a good sailing program and consistently took that passion he had there and went straight into coaching practically right outside of college, um, where he went to the Navy Academy not long afterwards, as mentioned previously. So now we're going to talk about the incident itself and the career-ending decision that John Vandemoer made. He was actually the first person to be charged in the Varsity Blues case, and this was for accepting gifts and donations to the sailing program itself. And these donations totaled over $770,000. He took these bribes to give to mark students as recruits or individuals to be put on the sailing team roster in the future. Um, it mentioned 3 specific cases in all the articles that I looked at. Um, None of the students ended up actually joining the school, and one was a previous student that was actually kicked out of the school and then was re-put on the roster, from my understanding, to be rehired and put back into the school as a recruit for the sailing team. So this all began with Rick Stinger, which is the main offender in the Varsity Blues case, and created the whole program and system to get these students into uh, prestigious colleges through bribery. Um, so it would start with Stinger recommending recruits to John Vandemoer, and most of them were legitimate at first. And he would give a small donation to the program along with, here's a student, that could be good for your sailing team. Here's also a donation to your program. But over time, it eventually became an exception of larger donations for students that really had no sailing background to begin with. Um, in transcripts written about the case, there were times to where conversation with Stinger and other parents, and the concept of how he'll take this student or that student, but he needs to also get some real students that had sailing backgrounds. He was trying to be careful with it, but in the end, he still got caught in the end. And as stated in this last section, there was 3 total recruits that were mentioned that didn't have any sailing backgrounds at all, but none of them went on to attend the school. So now we're going to go into his sentencing specifically. And what was interesting is while John was the first to be charged, he also pled guilty to this conspiracy to commit racketeering, which is his final sentencing. And through it, he was only charged with a 1-day prison sentence, and the federal judge actually deemed it already served due to his not only his guilty plea, but that his time in court counted as such. Um, Even though the U.S. District Attorney suggested that he have a longer sentencing of up to 13 months to deter this action in the future, um, the judge formally actually stated that uh, Vandemoer was probably the least culpable, mainly because not only did he admit to it right away and showed extreme guilt, but the fact that all of the donations that and money that he received went straight to the sailing program. None of it went to directly benefit him or his own pocket. Um, that he had a genuine interest and care for his program and the athletes in his program. Um, so the total aspect of his sentencing was that one-day prison sentence that was deemed served, 2 years of supervised release with 6 months in home confinement, and a $10,000 fine, which isn't that significant when you look at it. Um, and as I stated, the reasoning behind the sentencing was because of where the money went, and that none of it went to help him specifically, but his program. Um, and he fully took responsibility for his mistake. He had said multiple times how it was his problem, his mistake, and he was more cared about how it was going to impact the school and his program, and not as much himself, that he deserved to be in trouble for the mistake and choices that he made. What also helped is there were a large amount of letters that were written to the court and specifically the judge asking for him to have leniency in sentencing because of the individual that John Vandemoer was to his sailing students, and this was from mainly students, alumni, and current members of his team. So he was a very well respected individual that made it what a lot of people seem to say was an honest mistake, a mistake nonetheless. He clearly did this for the gain of his program and got the money illegitimately, but nonetheless, it wasn't him being malicious for his own gain, which was a very stark difference compared to a lot of the other people involved in the Varsity Blues scandal. So now I'm going to talk about the rebuilding of his reputation. So John Vandemoer was known to be someone of high moral standards and integrity. Even Judge Sobel mentioned how, from letters that he had read, how a lot of them talked about how he teach his team about having honesty and integrity and how those things were more important than victory, which I think might come down to the aspect of why, even though he took money and donations to put students in, and none of it went to himself. It went to his program and was not a completely selfish act. Um, and he also took full responsibility for his actions, saying that he deserved all of this, that he caused it, and that he was deeply ashamed. And this was him taking full ownership of his actions and admitting to his mistake, which is something that you didn't see with a lot of these Varsity Blues um, people that were charged, because a lot of them said it wasn't their fault, or they tried to blame it on this or that, or thought they didn't do anything wrong. But he fully took exception of what he did was immoral and against his values, that this was one of his slip ups, and he wanted to make sure that this was something that he wouldn't do again. Um, Another thing that was mentioned in a lot of the articles was I was reading was to know him as a coach was to know him being out there in the rain cheering on his team as they fought during championships and everything, and being there no matter what, not in this cushy seat, watching, but being out there with them and encouraging them. And that is something that I feel like any athlete would want as their coach in that kind of example. Um, so he clearly did something wrong, but I feel like his ownership of his mistake and who he had been in the past kind of isn't a tribute to giving him an opportunity to rebuild his reputation. Um, and the concept of that he broke the rules and the values that he had preached, and that he would need to work hard to rebuild his credibility. And that is something that exactly what he was trying to do. In fact, short after he pleaded guilty, he lost his job at Stanford and would have to do a complete reset. And that is what he's been working on to this day, and I'll talk about that actually in the next slide. So now lastly, I'm going to talk about him moving forward. So his life after sentencing is he's been trying to rebuild his personal brand, and in fact went to go back to school. So he's currently enrolled in Cornell University and pursuing an MBA. One of the articles I had read mentioned the fact that his wife mentioned that he was wanting to go back to get his MBA and to continue to provide for his family, which is his utmost importance. And it seems like who he has been in his past standard has helped him to get into Cornell University and continue. This information I actually found from his LinkedIn specifically, and I actually linked that below in the presentation and in my works cited to his direct LinkedIn if you want to read a little bit more about him and what he's trying to do right now. Um, his family life, his wife still remains extremely supportive of him, which is sometimes hard in these situations when a man who has built a career is losing everything. And he continues to provide for his family currently through private coaching and recruiting here and there. He has a lot of experience, and his reputation has been tarnished, but I don't think it's been obliterated. So it's given him the opportunity to keep pushing to further his goals and figure out what he really wants to do and how he can provide in the future. And I think I hope that Cornell will give him that opportunity to continue to take care of his family. I ultimately, after learning more about him and reading through all this, I really think it was a man who worked hard that made a mistake thinking that he would be able to get some funds to be able to help his team. That ultimately he sacrificed, well, I wouldn't say sacrificed, but made this decision for the ultimate benefit of his team. If he had to take one or two students, illegitimately, that wouldn't be the majority of his team, and the financial benefit from it would be able to afford new equipment or anything that they needed to improve their program. And I think that was his ultimate goal. And even though he's found guilty, he took responsibility when he was found out. And I really believe that out of all the individuals I've heard about and learned about through this, trial in the Varsity Blues scandal, I think this is definitely an individual that could bounce back from this. He made a mistake hoping to do the best he could for his team, and it ended up costing him. And he's taking responsibility for that action and continuing to move forward. I think at this point in time after this, there's nothing more he can do, and I think that's a respectable decision on his part. So lastly, this is my works cited page. It contains sources from the media websites I looked at, including his coaching profile from Stanford. There wasn't a lot of information about him, even his family information, besides these articles that I found that were almost all mainstream media. He was pretty much known in his tight knit community of sailing, but not much outside of that. And I think because of that, it was harder to find information. But thankfully, through being able to look at multiple sources that covered this, I was able to find consistent information between them and be able to use that in my presentation. Um, I also linked some sources to PDFs, or where I found my PDFs from their various websites originating, whether it be pictures from the Stanford sailing team that you saw in the background from a couple of them to his LinkedIn to headshots and his LinkedIn. Um, it was very interesting to get to know and understand this individual's particularly from the Varsity Blue scandal because of his situation was very different from a lot of the others, where he put all of the money that he had received illegitimately into his program and not filling his own pockets. Um, he was pressured and probably was trying to give as much money as he could to his team to support future success. And in doing so, he chose to go through illegitimate methods, and when he was caught, he decided to take full responsibility, which I believe is a respectable choice, in that he was willing to accept punishment. Um, I believe that due to his character and his decision to take a responsibility is why he got a very short and light sentencing. Um, I hope that he can learn from this mistake and pick himself back up and rebuild his reputation. And I believe that him going to Cornell University is a great start. But nonetheless, thank you for listening and looking through my presentation. I hope that you found it interesting, and thank you very much. Have a great day.